Hello, I'm Harry Dunlevy and I'm a director of Work Horizons. I'd like to welcome you to this event, which is around launching our consultancy practice. I was going to say good afternoon to everybody, but we've got an international audience today. So I'm delighted to welcome people from Egypt, US, and India. So whatever time zone you're in, either good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. And of course, wherever you are, I hope you're keeping safe and well in these difficult times. Just a few words about me. My background is very much in HR. I've had a long HR career across a number of sectors. I've been fortunate enough to be HR director for companies like Land Rover, BMW, EMI, and Grant Thornton. I've got the scars to prove it, and I'm pleased to say I've also learned a lot along the way. I've been able, I'm delighted to say, to share a lot of that experience with my colleagues in Work Horizons and help grow this business to where it is today. We are really now at our second phase and trying to launch the business more widely, new activities, new offers, new consultancy thinking. And I hope you'll hear some of that today when I introduce my colleagues, which we will get to in just a second. But before I do that, a couple of practical points. To the right of your screen, you should see a column that's headed Events, Backstage and Stage. We're concerned that we don't just speak to you today, that we try and engage with you and get your input as well. So if you were able to click under the sign that says Event, you'll see two things that say Chat and Polls. We're running a couple of polls today, I think 3 in all, but we'd like your input on this one in particular as we kick off. What is your primary business concern as we go into 2021? Please give us your thoughts. And of course, as the event proceeds, we'd welcome your thoughts around chat, any questions you have, any comments you've made, anything you're disagreeing with or you think we've missed. Please do tell us, feedback to us. So if you'll bear with us as well, I think along the way we may get the odd technical hitch. We've all been on enough Zoom calls now to know these things do not work perfectly. And we all heard that the best quoted saying in 2020 was, "Can you hear me?" So we're hoping we don't get too much of that. But if I move on now and ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. Today you'll be meeting the practice heads of our 3 practices. And if I start with Diane Rance, who leads our coaching and leadership practice. Diane.
Thank you, Harry. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be with you today. As Harry says, I'm leading on Work Horizons Coaching and Leadership Practice. And I think at the moment, never have we more needed a safe place to talk and process all that we're going through. My background is in HR, or personnel as it was then, within the manufacturing sector, rising to be a HR director. And I've worked independently for the last 17 years. And I'm delighted at this stage of my career to be working with Old Rover Group colleagues again and with Joe Carr and others to bring an offering around expertise, both breadth and depth of expertise around a range of people management issues. Whilst I'm concentrating on coaching and leadership development, that's very much within the context of all that happens in an organisation and all the people management issues that sit in an organisation. So welcome today, and I'll pass over to Rob now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us. And I'm just looking at the chat and seeing names from my past, so it's lovely to see everybody there. I'm one of the founders of Work Horizons, along with the late and still much missed Anita Pickerton, with Philip Jones and Ralph Savage. Our initial concept was very much about a career transformation transition tool, something where people could work online and develop their sense of purpose and then find something to fulfill that. And what I've realized is actually this is what was bringing purpose to my life, and it's what's getting me to bounce out of bed. My background is HR primarily. I was HR director of one of the GCAM businesses, for example, and a personnel director, which just shows how old I am, in a previous iteration. But this Work Horizons and where we're going with all of this, and with our focus on the individual and our focus on trying to make organizations so much more productive, is exactly where I want to be. And Joe, you're the practice head.
Yes, I'm the newbie. Thanks, Rob. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm looking at that poll on the side there. We're getting some really good numbers in. But between you and me, I think I'd like to change that poll, because I'd like to know if anyone else is anywhere near as flooded as I am today. So all I would say is, if my screen fills with bubbles, you see a hand waving or this floating past, then can you send someone to help me, please? It means I'm drowning. But thanks very much for your time, and thanks everyone for coming today. I'm leading the Work Horizons Consultancy Practice. That covers a lot of topics, from organisation renewal, restructure and structure, governance, process improvement, and lots of the things that feature under the banner of talent, whether that be acquisition, identification, development, etc. And basically, I want to share with you, just before we get into the Q&A today, is a bit of a background, just to set the scene. I remember a few years ago first coming across the acronym VUCA, which I'm sure everyone here knows: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And VUCA was very much a way of dealing with the situation that you find yourself in, the times that we find ourselves in. And that acronym has so been made for the time that we're living in at the moment. Change is so much 24/7. And I think this is just, I want to give you just a little insight as to what happened to me in the last 12 months. So I'm just going to share my screen. So do bear with me whilst I do that. You think I'd get this smooth by now, wouldn't you? So hopefully everyone's okay with seeing that now. My background, I love this photograph. This was New Year's Eve 2019, and I'm sure we can all agree without exception that life was much simpler back then. That was me and my husband, my stepdaughter and her boyfriend just behind me, in the pub in the village nearby on New Year's Eve 2019. This whole thing around COVID, well, was coronavirus then, and it was somewhere out there still sort of in China. We were watching about it on the news every day, but we had no idea what it was going to do to our lives. So I do like to look back at that photograph and laugh at ourselves, how innocent we were then. Bit more about me. I've been self-employed as an HR consultant for 5.5 years now, and I joined the Work Horizons family in 2020. I've got 26 years of HR experience in organisations like General Electric, Thomas Cook, Travelex. I've worked in generalist HR roles, talent roles, resourcing, leadership. I've also had the great opportunities to work both in-house and out-house, if you like, in recruitment, process outsourcing, BPO and consultancy, which has been great for me to build up my perspective on things. So this really is a little case study in COVID. If I take it back to 2018, I was lucky enough to be rehired to a previous client, which is a German utilities company that everyone's familiar with. And I'd gone back there to do a short piece of work, which actually resulted in almost 2 years. Towards the end of my time there, I was leading a team as part of the HR function, supporting the digital technology team. And that team was a talent team. It comprised people in recruiting and developing people in entry programs, so our graduates, working students and apprentices, learning development, including supporting the leadership talent process, and recruiting the regular suspects. And we got to the end of 2019, Looking forward to 2020 with some real excitement. We started looking at what the business strategy was and tried to tease out as a team, what are the key things that we want to really focus on for next year that's going to have some real impact on what the business wants to achieve. So some examples there is we identified we needed to start creating talent pools in the scarce skills area. This was in digital after all, so that was pretty much how we lived, trying to find scarce skills. We wanted to up our capability on being able to direct source and process improvement in everything we did. At the beginning of 2020, the team and I sat down together individually and went through what we wanted to do as a result of that. So we'd set our agenda. So where did we link into that on an individual basis? And that allowed us to build some development plans, build some career plans, and really understand how we could manage people's aspirations and link them to what the business is trying to achieve. So we were in good shape, or so we thought, because then this chap strolled into town and basically upended all of our worlds. Never have we ever experienced something that's actually touched everyone's lives around the world simultaneously. And I remember having many conversations in March last year, wondering where we were going to be in 12 months from now. If we knew that we were still going to be dealing with it, I wonder how we would have felt about it. So what the impact of that was, my organisation had to move from the beginning of March to 100% remote working within 21 days. Now, the organisation I was working with was a pretty forward-thinking organisation, and remote working had been very much the norm. Lots of people managed to combine that with commuting careers from other countries, caring responsibilities, or is just the time to have to think quietly at the end of the beginning of a week. But obviously getting the entire workforce to work remotely within 21 days was a huge pressure on the network function, cybersecurity, IT support, application support, hardware, IT support, you name it, and not just in one country. This was based across many countries, with the support being in Germany, Romania, and India. So a huge amount of coordination needed to take place in order to achieve that. And that was a hell of an achievement to do in 21 days. Simultaneously, as any good business would do, the finance function started looking at what coronavirus was going to mean to the business in terms of its financial standing. What impact was it going to have? Where were the costs going to be? Where were the shortfalls in certain income areas? A spending review then progressed into certain activities off the back of that. And the one that hit us in HR, first of all, was a freeze. That was a hiring freeze, immediately affecting all external hires, all contractors, and all working students. Now, just think that's an already stretched HR, an entire business, but overlay that, the planned integration that they had with their recently acquired largest competitor, which was a huge work stream in itself. That in itself had massive implications on the amount of work people were actually dealing with. So then that put us all in a position as to what the hell are we going to do to get through this? And my immediate challenge was, bearing in mind the hiring freeze, I had 4 recruiters sitting there effectively with allegedly nothing to do. Their worlds were frozen. These were 4 really good recruiters, people we considered as talent. So for me, we had to really think about that very quickly, because at the same time, the rest of the HR function was overloaded, dealing with policy queries, changes to working hours, sickness queries, and all of the variety of things that everyone in HR had to deal with around about that time. So it wasn't really a consideration just to let those individuals sit there doing nothing. But at the same time, there was no point. There was no point in throwing them into work that wasn't going to actually help anyone. So where did we start? Well, I started by looking at the work that I'd done with the guys at the end of the previous year, and we'd done some strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to really drill down and understand what skills we had and what opportunities we had to actually leverage those skills. That helped me to map them against the projects HR was working on, and also gave us a clearer understanding of the transferable skills that we had to hand. That allowed us to successfully reassign all 4 of those recruiters to some real good work that they were doing. And actually, that had some great upside, because not only did it help build the team spirit, so no one felt as if there were people sitting there with nothing to do while the rest of us were slogging it out, but also it helped us find alternative unplanned routes to their development, and giving them a project experience that, you know what, they might not normally have had otherwise. So the best thing about it was not only just keeping those guys retained, but also we were able to demonstrate to the business that we were every bit as flexible as they needed us to be. So that made me reflect as I came away from that assignment. And when I look back at what I learned, it's interesting. This whole piece around the performance appraisal cycle, development, etc., within a business is vital. It really is. I mean, I think back to days where I'd be sitting with HRBPs, heads of HR, as we went through the annual performance appraisal thing with a business, and everyone talking about what percentage of their area was complete. So focusing purely just on the quantitative, and not focusing on the qualitative. You know, we have to be able to challenge notions of going through the motions. That rhymes. Because actually, when you know what talent you've got sitting on your bench, only then can you really make a good job of making sure that you can deploy them in the right way. Being realistic for me, this whole VUCA thing, it can mean not only changing direction, but you actually might need a new map. So the flexibility and agility that you need to deploy in this world today is much greater than previously. I also took that challenge as my moment to find an opportunity for those 4 individuals. I guess it could have been easier just to hope that they put their hands up and volunteered for stuff, and actually they probably would have done. But to be fair, I didn't want them to get into that position, so I wanted to stand up for them and make sure that they were considered to be involved with everything, because otherwise there was a chance we could lose them. And the other thing I've learned is this year is going to be exactly the same as last year, but it's going to be different. And by that, I mean, yes, things are going to change. It's probably going to change faster. We've got all sorts of things coming as we approach the utopia of vaccination land. So you know, that in itself sounds great, but what do we have to go through before we get to that stage? So that was just a little insight into my own experience, you know, this time last year. Let me just talk quickly about Work Horizons. We've got 3 distinct practices. So just so you know, coaching and leadership sits with Diane, consultancy sits with me, and career transition and well-being sits with Rob, all of whom have been introduced so far. We also have strategic partnerships with 3 partners at the moment. HR Inform, which are a great online resource for all things people. We've got a partnership with a great ATS organisation, Skilled, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And from a wellbeing perspective, we partner up with a great not-for-profit health organisation called Westfield Health. So that's a little bit about the 3 legs that we've got, as it were, as well as strategic partnerships. Before I go, I've got a little poll that hopefully is showing on the right, because I'd really like to find out from the folk who are sitting with us today what your key talent challenges are going to be in 2021. But in terms of talent, let me just show you, this is a great picture of the folk that sit within the Work Horizons family. It's not just the 4 of us who are here today, but all of those people that you see on there. We've got a great coverage of coaches, career transition coaches, HR specialists, develop specialists, talent and resourcing specialists, and some great strategists as well within the family. And I thought it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge that we are part of a much bigger family, as it were. So I think I've rattled on quite well. The water is staying down so far. So at that point, I think I'll hand back to Harry.
Thank you, Joe. That was great. And don't forget Joe's poll there on the right-hand side. There's half a dozen questions there, and we really welcome your view. And also, as Joe mentioned, she's shown our family photograph, as she kindly called it. And a number of our colleagues are on the call today. So I'd like to say hello to them and welcome them as well. We really do appreciate everything you're doing for us right now. So, and I hope you're all keeping safe and well as well. So to try and build on this passing of expertise and sharing issues and discussing current problems, we've been talking, as many of you do, to your network, to colleagues who are HR leaders and directors and teams or change specialists or people who are just having to deal with some of the chaos that we're all surrounded with right now. And we've been working through a series of questions with them, trying to shape our business, look at our own strategy, and look at the services we're offering. We'd like to today share some of those questions with you, give our thoughts, and if you're on the chat, we'd welcome your thoughts as well. And I'll ask my colleagues to contribute to the discussion as well. So hopefully you'll hear a bit about our own experience, but also we'll talk about some real life issues that you're facing right now. One of the first questions we had was really more of a strategic and than tactical one. A lot of us are dealing with the day-to-day. We've got our noses to the grindstone. We're having to work very hard, remotely in many cases. But there is still a strategic requirement to think about the future. And one of the questions that came up that we've been discussing, particularly with HR directors, has been, how do I keep my HR strategy aligned when the business is changing so dramatically and will change even more? My own personal reflections on this are, well, first of all, it's great to have an HR strategy. I think that's really important to most businesses, and certainly all the businesses I've been involved in have always recognized that HR should contribute in a strategic way, as well as contributing in an operational way. But I still believe, by the way, that HR has to earn its place at the table. I think unless HR is delivering those basics, can we hire people properly? Can we get them paid? Can we onboard them? Can we release them? Can we train them? All of those fundamentals, if we're not doing those things well, then we're really not going to be listened to very seriously when we talk about the bigger issues. So I think once we get those sorted, and getting those challenges sorted is big enough challenge in itself, it is a question of how we move up the value chain. How do we add more value? How do we become even more relevant to the business than just turning a handle and doing the routine processes? And the world of HR and the world of business is changing. There's no doubt about that, as we're seeing with what's going on now. But even if this wasn't happening, then we know things like the digital world, the online world, customer behavior, all of those things are changing. Product cycle times, how fast things are coming to market, internationalization, globalization. Despite what's happened around Brexit, the fact is we are a global country is what we're hearing. That's what we want to be. So a lot of change we've had to accommodate. Moving up the value chain, however, I think involves things like analytics, HR analytics. Where are we going to build on the data that we already have? How can we use that to inform business decisions? How do we use technology to get faster, quicker data through the organization? And talent. Can I just go back to Joe for a second? You were saying something around the processes you use for talent, Joe. The poll is still coming through, but what's your experience on talent management systems as such?
There's plenty of talent management systems out there, and obviously, you know, that's something for each business to work on. But there's also the transparency about talent management. You can put as much of a system in place as you like, but you need to be clear as the purpose and make sure that everyone's linked into it. I notice there's a great question Youssef Hussein's come up with in the box here for Transport for London. It's critical for us to develop an effective internal mobility strategy. Particularly now there's very little external recruitment and moving people internally. That's something I'm going to pick up on in a little while, because I've got one particular question around that one later on. But yeah, lots of systems in place, but you can have the best system in the world. It's about making sure it's clear why you've got it and what everyone's responsibility is.
Yeah, I was trying to lead into something I had some experience of in talent management in particular, and linked to how you keep your HR strategy aligned with the business needs. When I was working in AMI, for example, AMI was moving from selling CDs to all the usual retail outlets, to how do they cope with digitization and downloading music digitally. And of course, there weren't any people in the organization who really understood that, because they've been very good at selling CDs. But this whole new world of digitizing music and getting money out of it was something really new. So we had to turn our talent management analysis in a different way, take a different lens to it, really, and really look at skills and experiences in different parts of the organization, beyond selling and beyond marketing, into where technology was going, identifying the gaps, looking at the training needs, bringing in new training experiences and new ways of working, really, to capitalize on what was coming and what has now become really how the music market works. So a small example, another thing has changed dramatically, I guess, over the last year that many of you on the call will have had to deal with, is customers moving much more online. So the growth in that and supporting that, both from a technology point of view and people's skills point of view, has been a real demand. We've seen ourselves a massive growth in the sort of requirements for talent in that area. And there's no doubt that retraining people will help, holding on to your own talent will help, but finding the people who really can grow in that space is going to be probably a game changer for many businesses in the future. Joe's got a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you look at the poll that sits there, 43% of those who participate are actually saying retaining current talent is one of their biggest challenges.
Yeah, which I agree with.
Yeah.
So HR strategy still has a massive place in any organization, in my view. As I say, we can grow the influence of HR, we can grow the contribution of HR, really by looking, I think, at new developing techniques, I suppose, is the word to use. But the analytics, the use of technology, and really focusing on talent, I think, from my point of view, would be three things that will help you keep your strategy aligned with what the business is going to need now and in the future. I don't know if we've got any chat comments on any of that.
Can I just make a comment? Because I think, Harry, it's our chance to really influence business strategy as well. So we don't behave passively. I think we can be really active in setting the agenda. And I think that Reuters research that came out recently, which showed that of people in jobs, 70% of them are, to use their phrase, actively disengaged, shows a great opportunity for us to all get involved in terms of not just motivating people, but having them in the right slots, having them with the right skills. You know, that is a huge issue for the agenda, and that can be our major contribution, I think. Yeah.
I think you're right, Rob. I think the employee engagement agenda is still one that is massively underplayed at the moment. We know about the benchmark organizations that people really want to work for. People like Google, who look after a lot of well-being and develop people well, and it's a proud brand that you want on your CV. But nonetheless, I think there is a massive opportunity still in most organizations to capitalize on the skills and contribution that people want to give, and for some reason they're not being allowed to give. What's your thoughts on that, Diane, from a coaching point of view?
I think from a coaching point of view, never has coaching been needed more, but operational issues are getting in the way of people having the space to reflect. I think also coaching in terms of using that as a tool to recognize talent, by which I mean to still make space for individuals who perhaps had a really, really busy 10 months or so, to have space to reflect on their own development, to think about where they can best contribute to the organization. I think where talent is joining an organization at the moment, I know my daughter started work last year after graduating, and we see young people being onboarded remotely.
Yeah.
And that's on people in terms of them being engaged, being employed, when they're being managed remotely from the first day within the organisation. And I think offering them a way of them being able to identify and discuss and process the issues that surround them when they're joining an organisation remotely is something where coaching can become a really useful tool to use. I think often we think of coaching as being a purely one-to-one thing.
Yeah.
But certainly we want to offer it in terms of group coaching, for example, with new starters, and also team coaching, where teams have been through an enormous period of turmoil in the last 10 months.
Yeah.
And team coaching can be a way of giving them a space and a process to reflect all they've gone through, to refresh and re-energize themselves, and to reset direction for the future, really.
Thank you.
And
We get comments here on the chat, by the way, from people on the call. One around onboarding virtually. Clearly, we're having to do many things virtually now. I know my son, given a personal example, he's just joined a big technology company, and he's been given a fantastic support in terms of onboarding, but all done remotely. And that is the way that clearly is going to have to go in the future. Joe, any thoughts on that?
3 guesses. I was on mute. Eek, sorry. Yeah, this was actually interesting paper I wrote at the end of last year about it, and the level of digital engagement in terms of the selection process at the moment is huge, and it's expected. So people expect to have every single part of the recruitment process available to them on multiple devices, whether it's their phone or their iPad or laptop or whatever it is, whenever they want to go on board. And that goes into the onboarding thing, but it only goes so far when you're working in a remote environment. And I think that's the thing that we're now coming across, which is people are joining organizations. They get this lovely carrier bag sent to them with goodies, t-shirts, tea bags, coffees on their first day, an awful lot of fuss made of them. And then it just kind of peters down from that point. And I think that's the real challenge in remote working, is that how do you as a leader keep in contact with those individuals so that they're still engaged and that you're building their engagement with them, using what you know about them in the selection process around their development, setting objectives which they can achieve in the short term, and not just saying, well, if you're as good as you said you would, you'll do fine on your own. That's okay, you can do that, but it's a different world when you're working remotely. So I do think taking a step back and really thinking and reflecting on what that individual's going through needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we've been looking at ourselves and discussing this question of giving people the right sort of support who are working remotely, particularly leaders who are leading teams remotely. A really new challenge for many of them. And many of them don't even have the skill to be great leaders yet, with that still growing and developing in them. Now we're asking them to take on something even bigger in terms of remote leadership and how we do that. We've also had some comments about the use of data and analytics, and we have to be sure that the data going in is obviously right and we can use it properly. But I think most of us are hearing and seeing more, particularly if you look at the technology world, about how analytics can help us and help our customers. Let me move on and see if we can bring some of these other issues in as well. And the next question that came up is really very topical and touches to some extent on some of the things we've already discussed. How do we help our people who are struggling with mental health issues? Diane.
So I've reflected really on various groups that I belong to and various people I've spoken to over the last 10 months. And I think in terms of how we can help our colleagues and our organisations to support those who have mental health issues, the 3 things that come to mind really. The first one is, what mechanisms, what products, what services, whatever you want to call it, do we provide to our employees? And one of the best experiences I've come across, one of the best initiatives I've come across is one which a colleague organization, and they've actually provided counselling services not only for their own employees, but for their employees' families and for their employees' children. And I think it's easy for us to forget at times that our employees sit within their family systems and their families are going through enormous stress. So I was reading this morning a piece of research from Oxford University about how over time they've monitored stress levels and depression levels, particularly within parents with young children at home, their schooling. And they've monitored that over the last 9 months or so and seen how it went. The stress and depression levels reduced during the summer holidays, how they increased again during the autumn term. So I think it's really important that we think, what can we put in place to support our employees as family members, looking after their own families and their own children and all those stresses that come with trying to juggle that while still working. So what can we put in place to support them? It might be counsellors, it might be activities, could be all sorts of things, but what can we do beyond the usual? I think the other thing is something that Harry alluded to is what skill sets do we need to help our leaders develop further? So skill sets around really good listening skills, skill sets around having tricky conversations remotely, skill sets around putting ourselves into the shoes of others and using our coaching skills and coaching questions to help us better understand and step into the shoes of others. So there's a whole leadership skill set around supporting people in their mental health, both those who have issues and preventing those issues developing. And then I think the third aspect is, what do we do for ourselves as individuals to support our own mental health so that we can support others? It's really hard to support others if you're approaching burnout yourself, or not necessarily burnout, but if you're just exhausted yourself. So I was on running a CIPD workshop last week, and one of my key messages was in your planning for 2021, make sure you plan to look after yourself. Because if you don't look after yourself, how on earth are you going to look after others as effectively as you'd like to be able to do so? So 3 elements. What skills and support mechanisms are we going to put in place for those who have mental health issues or who might develop them? What are we going to do to develop our leadership skills to support others? And thirdly, how are we going to look after ourselves so we can support others? So those would be my key thoughts. And coaching can support all of that. So there's a whole range of things: coaching, mentoring, formal training, group coaching, all sorts of things to support that. But the first thing is to bring it into our context, and we need to do something about them. So those are some of the good practice. Some of the bad practice I've not heard about is an example I heard of someone who's told they were on the at-risk list for redundancy, and they didn't hear from their manager in the next 6 weeks. Yeah. So some managers just aren't even attending to the really basic fundamentals of supporting individuals in times of stress.
Yeah. One of the questions we had, which touches on what you just run through, Diane, one of our audience is asking, is there any survey evidence yet to talk about satisfaction amongst home workers, people who are having to work remotely?
There's a lot of evidence that people around are just, well, I think it splits into 2 groups, or several groups. There are those who are trying to juggle homeschooling at the same time, and how their employers support them and recognise that is significant in terms of not only their own well-being, but also how they feel about their organisation. Those who feel abandoned by the organisation and just left to get on with it, and there's very little regard for the context in which they're working, are the ones who are most likely to look for another opportunity when the recruitment market opens up again. So we have to think about that. Yes, Jo?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because it's probably not massively scientific, but the numbers were quite impressive. On LinkedIn, there's a guy called Chris Hurd, who's the CEO of a company called First Base, and they do remote working platforms. So he did a survey at the beginning of this year. He had a poll, and 36,000 people replied to it. And it's asking people in the new world, or the new normal, or whatever we're going to call it, what's your preferred working method? And it's really interesting. 49% said they wanted a hybrid, mostly based from home, remote. 29% said full-time remote. So basically that whole remote bit is so resonant with a lot of people. 18% said hybrid, mostly office, and only 4% said they wanted to get back to the office. That's amazing. And that's actually, because that's on LinkedIn, I'm guessing that the responses will be global. So, you know, you can't nationalize it in any way, but I just thought that was quite something.
Yeah. Rob, from a well-being point of view, have you got any thoughts on?
I think what that says is that managers need to not assume that their up till now normal communication practices and engagement practices, that they will still suffice. They need to really do an audit of how they engage with their employees, how they communicate with them, and really go back to basics and say, is that still fit for purpose? Does it still support the organisation, the team, and does it still support the individual? Rob, I think you wanted to say something.
Oh, before Rob just jumped in, just to say thanks to the people on the call who are suggesting this is some research leads that we could look at. Harvard Business Review, a company called BCG, Microsoft have done some work. So I guess this is something for the future. Certainly, we'd be happy to share information around and link it to how we might be able to support it. Rob?
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things. The first of which is, you know, the whole mental wellness thing, and that's a big focus of our relationship with Westfield Health, and we're expanding that to go with physical well-being as well. But that agenda is absolutely paramount. We have amongst our associates counsellors, not just coaches, which is perhaps helpful. And that final point from Diane, I think we need to move from communicating, which typically people think of as transmission. They say something, therefore people will have heard it and understood it, to something far more encompassing around connectivity. And within this new world of whether it's working from home full-time at the hybrid, which I think is where most people are going to try and go, if they have any scope for that, how do you remain connected, which is a completely different emphasis to how do we communicate?
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. And I must admit, going back to some of what Joe's just run through, I'm slightly surprised by only 4% wanting to go back to the office, because I guess there might be other research that suggests people actually miss that social interaction and the support around them. And also, there is other research I know that I've read, which suggests that companies might be losing out, because when people are physically together, more ideas, more interplay, more positive contribution is generated. I don't know if many people on the call share that, but that is a possible downside to people actually working remotely.
It is, and I think also we're sorry, Rob. I was going to say we're social beings, and part of what work does for us is it provides that social connection, and all that goes with that in terms of re-energizing us and stimulating thought, as you say, and refreshing us. So I think we have to be very mindful that we're social beings, and we have to find a way of being social beings in a remote world. Sorry, Rob, I cut across you.
Well, that's quite all right. Steve Jobs wanted everybody at work, not because he didn't trust them, but because he was in a very innovative, dynamic industry, and he wanted people just sparking off one another, even at the water cooler, metaphorically.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That's really useful discussion. Let's move on to continuing with talent. Let's talk about retaining talent. One of the questions we've had is people being concerned about retaining the talent they've got and really looking after the key people. But how do you do that without really upsetting the rest of the team?
Yeah, this is one I've thought about long and hard, and I go back to when my first ever exposure to the notion of talent and succession planning was back in GE in the 1990s with the old 9-box grid, which is, you know, tried and tested and trusted tool used in most organizations. I think GE called it Session C, and I've never known for the life of me why they called it that. But I guess the question is, how do we hold on to our talent? By the time you're having that thought in the leadership, you're probably already too late, as Rob mentioned before. At any one time, up to 70% of your people are actively disengaged. So, this is something it's not just, it doesn't happen just because we've got COVID at the moment. This is ongoing. I guess some of the basics are around, do you have a process for identification? What's the definition? And is that talent aligned to the business strategy? Thinking in terms of the digital world now, and how a lot of organizations have undergone and are undergoing transformations from being just, the traditional brick building to an entirely online offering. Is your talent process transparent? I worked with a huge defense company many years ago who had, I can't remember if they called it Spectrum or something like that, but if you were on it, you didn't know. So if you were considered talent, you had no idea. And there was never any real clear reason for that. And as a result of which, people didn't know that they were valued. They couldn't really, find any measure of understanding if they were on that list. Only if they were tapped up for a specific role would it then become apparent that they had been considered to be that. But to be transparent about what talent means, everyone has talent. It's just understanding what talent is actually germane to what the organization needs in terms of its direction, and also that all talent is welcome. Managing expectations as a result. So again, going back to, do you actively engage with people and tell them that they're involved in that? What is their understanding of what that means to them as an individual? And that has massive implications on levels of engagement. Also, segmenting your talent, one size fits all isn't really very good anymore. So a lot of organizations focus purely on the talent and succession of the leadership, which is great. But what about those in your entry level pools, those people just coming into the business? They do need to see a clear line of sight from where they start and how they move, whether that be in a more agile, flat organization, could be a series of sideways moves. How do you leverage that, and how do you make sure that you're actually keeping them on track? Obviously, management and leadership, but what about those skilled, scarce skills, digital skills, etc.? People who may be hugely important to the organization, but don't actually want to be managers or supervisors of people. You need to keep them. So I think ensuring that you have a broad talent approach that encompasses everything that business needs. And that's something that the last one that I mentioned, that was a piece of work we started on in the German utilities company, is actually saying, yes, within our digital arena, we do have individuals who are very different to the traditional join here, go up there, do a bit of leadership development here, and boom, there you are in a leadership role. They did not want that. These were people who came in with PhDs, who loved what they did, worked with big data, for example, and didn't really ever want to move from that. But they were so important to the business that we actually evolved our talent approach to make sure that we encompass the program that would also include them. So that's about, creating also communities of talent. And once you're in that community, what are the rules of engagement? I've seen great examples where we've implemented things like, you're in talent now organize yourself. You're responsible for your own development, go off and do it. And we've seen great examples of international cohorts of talent actually putting on their own, go and find out what happens in other parts of the businesses. And that not only increases their own knowledge and value to the business, but also exposure to other leadership teams that they may not have come across before. And that also increases the engagement there. But finally, also, I think there's also a need for, once you're in there, to make sure that there is no sense that you pull up the ladder behind you. Your responsibility is also to look back in the other talent pools and make sure that you're growing them. And thinking about what's going to be needed after you and beyond that. And then I think there is also this, but keeping everyone engaged in that, and how do you actually then also develop people, particularly now with business challenges, where budgets are being cut? So the traditional go off and do an MBA or what have you might not necessarily be as easy to achieve. Well, you still got the ability, you've got talent there, so involve them in problem solving, involve them in identifying new markets, involve them in identifying new partnerships that may not have been obvious to us originally. Projects, just use them or lose them. That's basically what I would say. So that I guess that's my kind of hot take on it in a couple of short paragraphs.
Yeah, if I can just add a comment around generational as well. I mean, most organizations now are working with at least four generations of talent in their organizations, and baby boomers, generation X, Y, and Z. And now I read an article the other day around an emerging next group. They've called it Alpha, which really is the generation that's grown up with iPhones, for example. They've known nothing but iPhones and all the associated devices since then. So there's almost segmentation. There is segmentation if you look at the behaviors and the characteristics of each of those groups, and focusing your talent solution into what those people are looking for, because some of them actually don't want to become the next CEO. Some of them want a broader base to their lives. They want to be doing things externally. They want a lot of personal development. They might be interested in the development of their partner, or something going on in their family. They want to contribute in other ways. There are some who still want to get that fast track up to the board level seat. But the world of talent definitely is changing in terms of the solutions that people are looking for. And I guess, Diane, from a coaching point of view, tailoring that offer is also important as to how you offer it, whether it's remotely or occasionally when the world allows, face to face, or in some other way.
Absolutely. And I think from what I read in the research, there's a growth in group coaching. So where perhaps you've got a group of people, Joe mentions about technical specialists, the men want to develop their skills and their contribution to the organization, and group coaching in a group of like-minded people working together could be a perfect way to do that. Similarly, team coaching. So I think one of the things organizations will be doing over the next few months is resetting themselves, resetting what needs to be the culture in the organization for increased remote working, what need to be the different behaviors for more remote working, and team coaching, whether with a leadership team, if you like to set direction, or with a more junior part of the organization. Team coaching can be a really efficient way of developing people, of developing a new culture and way of working, of retaining talent, and they can sit side by side with one-to-one coaching. So I think there's a move away from the idea of coaching being a one-to-one process to it being more of a social activity, by which I mean either team or group coaching, perhaps supported by individual coaching. But I think it all has a role to play in how organizations reset themselves against the background of everything that's happened over the last 12 months.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The question from Yusuf was also about, I think, not people who would see themselves as talent, but about being able to move people around. And without going off into a whole new theme, I think that it is important that we don't just think about this as an elite function. There's a lot of talent at all levels in the organization, but there's also a business need, and there may be issues with trade unions, there may be issues with processes, and how we deal with all of that. And with Yusuf, I will pick that conversation up separately.
Yeah. I think a lot of organizations need to reset, and having somebody who's not as emotionally attached to it and isn't as deeply embedded in the organization with a different perspective can be really useful to ask some questions around reflecting on all that's happened and fundamentally saying, are you still fit for purpose?
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting
exploring those sort of questions.
To go back over the onboarding process as well, and then just thinking through how that you've hired people because you think they're talent. So what do you know about them? You bring them on board in this beautiful digital process, etc. Then suddenly, bam, they're sitting there with, with no contact at all. And this is where the group coaching thing could be really interesting. That is a great opportunity to really get the culture of the organization over, because how else is someone going to figure it out? You can say, oh, here's a t-shirt with the culture and the values printed on it, unless you're seeing that actually brought to life, then that's a huge missed opportunity. And I think we would, all of us to a person, say that just leaving people to get on with it is not going to help you. You potentially have wasted a huge amount of opportunity, time and money investing in the selection process to bring somebody in, which takes me to the next one, which was,
Jo, can I just say something?
Yeah.
Dom's just put a question about there are particular challenges for SMEs around these sort of issues, and totally, Dom, totally agree that SMEs have different challenges. They perhaps don't have the same resources. They have different pressures on them altogether. That means some of these activities that we're talking about, they just, whilst they may have as much need, they just don't have that space at the moment. So I think finding flexible ways in which we can support those organisations beyond such formal large-scale programs, you're absolutely right. And I think we've all worked within SMEs as well as large organisations, totally recognise that that's a difference. And there's a chronology about this, absolutely.
And also recognising in SMEs, you typically tend to find that HR, if you want, is spread much thinner than you would find elsewhere. So that's then what tools have we got, and how can we leverage them as much as possible? Which brings me on to the next point, which was one of a great question that came in, which was about managing recruitment applications. And we've seen the recruitment market completely changed. Unemployment is on the rise. And therefore organizations are seeing that when they post a job, they're getting hundreds of applicants. And, a lot of my network is recruiting, resourcing talent people. And we're forever seeing on LinkedIn people bemoaning the fact that they apply for jobs. And I've seen some truly heartbreaking stories of people since, almost a year ago, applying for literally hundreds of jobs and maybe getting 4 or 5 things back. That is unforgivable. And it's hugely damaging to brands, particularly now when there is the ability to post your reaction pretty quickly. With reviews on Glassdoor, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. I love the Mark Twain expression that says that a lie can travel around the world faster than the truth, and then the time it takes for the truth to lace up its boots. I'm not saying that what people are saying is a lie, but it's the idea of spreading your perspective on your experience is really damaging. And particularly, when you have invested, whatever the size of your organization, really slick digital experience, which matches people's expectations in terms of being able to see what's going on. If there's no humanity in that, then it's just a waste. So there is literally no no reason to actually let that happen in this day and age. And it's about what ATS are you using, what applicant tracking system are you using. That the idea of getting an acknowledgement is everyone should get an acknowledgement, but the ones that particularly irk people are the ones that say, if you've not heard anything from us in the next 21 days, just assume that you've been unsuccessful. And that's so inelegant. I have to say that's one of my big frustrations, that we can't be better than that. Because you never know, do you? In that 21 days, did someone accidentally put your application in another folder on the system? What have you been overlooked? You'll never know unless you get that complete closure. So that is an absolute must do. But it's about looking at what your system can do when you actually are overwhelmed, and looking at that system and optimizing its functionality to cope with that kind of thing so that it works better for you. And is it actually still fit for purpose? Because if not, then you need to replace it with some of the new breed stuff. And that's where our partnership with Skilled is particularly interested, because that's one really interesting piece of kit to have. Skilled is based on predictive analytics. So it's using data to help you pick out the right talent. And for me, that's the future of recruitment. It's a perfect investment, and these systems aren't massively expensive, not in the same way as some of the older ones used to be, when you were talking about 30,000-40,000 pounds a year. The new systems are a lot faster, they're cloud-based, and they're actually a lot more cost effective. So, find the time to research what's going to work. I mean, we're more than happy to help any organization with that. And that helps avoid that reputational damage. And you don't need me to tell you how expensive it is to make a mistake when you go all the distance of hiring someone you've made a big mistake. It's hugely damaging to the business. Harry, in your experience, what's been your
Yeah, I think I was trying to say earlier that we've got to earn our spurs by doing the basics well. So back to the chap who's got the SME perspective. Even if you're in a smaller business, you'll still want to treat people well and keep your reputation high as a good employer, I'm sure. And making those basic processes and systems work is really part of that. You've had a comment as well that, as you were speaking, Joe, on the chat, that people are also being asked now to input a lot of information into ATSs. And putting a lot of work and effort into that and really getting no feedback. It just goes dead, silent. You get nothing in return. And it's almost worse than waiting for a letter to come to say you've been unsuccessful, the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the ATS functionality is much better than it used to be, whereas you used to have to put in your next door neighbour's birth name, the cat's mother's name, etc., all that nonsense. These days, most good ATSs have the functionality that you either upload your LinkedIn profile or whatever your the major business social networking thing is in your country, as well as the opportunity to just upload your own CV, which will then be passed, and so it's a lot less labour intensive. I think you have to be appreciative that people have actually made the time. So I think it is about taking the time to look at what kit you can have, what system you can have. There are some on the market that are very, very keenly priced, aimed at all markets, but also the SME market, and more than happy to talk to people about those.
Yeah, we're getting a couple of comments on the chat, by the way. Some people are having problems getting the thread working, and I'm sorry that if you're not getting all the comments that are coming through, but certainly it's great that you're participating. Yeah. We appreciate that. Here we go. Philip, our tech advisor Philip is trying to help and tell you where some of those are. So hopefully that will help resolve the issue. Moving on really to the final end of this, the question session. I'd like to bring Rob in because we've really been talking about what are the key threats and opportunities for 2021. It's a constant discussion, certainly amongst us. And I know for many businesses, they're really trying to frame this and dealing with it on a day-to-day basis as everything from the impacts of Brexit and the day-to-day disruption some of that is causing, through to the latest figures on vaccinations and the rollout of what hopefully is going to be a very successful event and help us with everything that's going on now. But trying to cast ourselves forward in the people world, what do we think are the real threats and opportunities that are out there? And I think, Rob, you've been doing work on this and you've got a summary, I think, which might be helpful to some of our colleagues on the call.
Yeah, we will be sending to everybody a paper which reflects some of our thoughts around the whole thing. And it does go from, picking up on the point Dom made earlier about SMEs, the imperatives of the moment. There will be redundancies around the place. There will be difficulties, but it's how we treat the situation, but more importantly, how we treat the people. So professional and compassionate would be my words. So we do need to have a legally compliant process in this example, but we also need to be thinking about how we're treating the individuals, the outplacement and the support that they get, and remembering that the rest of the team and the outside world, the rest of the team are watching how we deal with these things. And if we're not careful, we'll be displaying to them behaviours which mean that when they get a chance, they will take that chance to leave us and go somewhere else. So there's a lot of work that we in the short term that actually will impact on the long term as well. But of course, in the longer term, there's a lot more to do. The positive agendas around leadership and change management and teamwork. And what will make that difference? What will move those 70% who are actively disengaged into a number which is a lot lower than that, which of course not only benefits the individual, but is benefiting the organisation hugely. If we could just change that to 60%, the impact on businesses would be profound. And if we can go below that, I mean, we really will be motoring. So I think that balance of short-termism and long-term viewing, and we're very conscious. I mean, Dom's point about the SMEs, we've created a product called Rebooting, which is very much about how you start up again. People coming back to work, the contrast of people who have been at work all the while, whilst others have been furloughed, whilst others have been working from home, and managing those relationships and some of the resentment that may have built up. How do you actually get the thing to go from standing to 100 miles an hour? The micro stuff, but the macro stuff as well.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned the rebooting experience, because certainly our feedback was certainly from SMEs, smaller organizations in particular. They found that sort of thinking and that sort of support helpful. Many of the larger companies have got HR teams of their own who are making things happen and handling change and developing new approaches. But the reboot content, Rod, do you want to just expand on that a little bit further?
Yeah, it will vary by organisation, but it's a program that's been put together by our associates, some of our associates who are very close to it all. And there are the relationships, but there are the processes. There's issues around suppliers, there's issues around our customers. Do we actually know who's there for us? You know, it's all very well saying, oh yes, we've got all of these suppliers. How can we interact with them? Are they doing the same things? If we have a surplus of people, can we use them better? You know, an example from my own history was in a redundancy situation. Of course, we were trying to take out costs. We found that one of the most important things we did was to move somebody. So engineering had an excess of people. Rather than make somebody redundant, we moved one of the better engineers into purchasing. And the savings that they were able to make in the purchasing department was worth 10 redundancies. And rather than pay out redundancy costs, you know, it was actually an incredibly positive thing to do, even if that did receive some resentment from the people in purchasing, who I think were shown not to be doing their job as effectively as they could have done. But it's just thinking differently about where we are, the issues we've got, and coming up with solutions and not just hiding from them. People are faced with some of the most profound difficulties, and just bringing people back to the workplace after 12 months of not being there, this is going to have a lot of psychological and well-being issues, and issues around complications with kids still being at home, even though parents are expected to go back to work, perhaps. There's a myriad, and we've got to be understanding, sensitive. I go back to my word connected to our people and know what the issues really are for them.
Yeah, a recent one that came up in the back to work scenario over the last week has been, as more and more people get vaccinated, can you force them back into the office? Or even as some of you probably saw the Pimlico plumbers story last week, no job. So some of them are probably legally very questionable, but certainly a minefield of new experiences we're all going to be stepping into as these things develop, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Okay, Rob, do you want to mention the white paper and how access to that?
Yeah, well, we're going to be sending out. Nobody needs to do anything. I mean, we're going to be sending this out, which will hopefully give some pointers. But I'd really like to think that it creates a conversation as well. You know, there are some of our thoughts around it. A lot of the issues we talked about this morning, or this afternoon, forgive me, but others as well. And it's not that this is comprehensive. This is a list of all of the issues that there will be. It's a start point, and if that stimulates more conversation, that would be brilliant.
One question that's just come through is, how would we encourage people to go back to the office? If there's only 4% that really want to be there, it sounds like that's quite a big uphill challenge to persuade people to go. Think that's doable?
I think we've moved through the point where we're going to be able to expect and demand that 100% of people come back, because there are going to be other organisations who aren't, who will be more attractive. I think that the big issue has been the lack of commute.
Yeah.
The number of conversations I have with people about how they're not having to go 1.5, 2 hours each way, and how they're actually able to contribute more because they're not tied. You know, if you've got a train at 5:30, you leave on the dot at 5 o'clock. Working from home, you don't mind staying online until 5:30 because you've still gained an hour and a half. So I think that the way that people are thinking about these issues is changing, and that's why the hybrid is going to be the model. And it's how we organise that. And does the hybrid mean everybody's in on a Monday and Tuesday? Do we spread it out? What's the impact on our customers? What's the impact on our suppliers? These are going to be tricky. And if we're not careful, there'll be some elite cliques.
Yeah.
People who think that they are special.
What Joe was talking about, a hybrid situation, certainly to encourage people part-time back into the office and then gradually grow it. And most businesses have decided to keep people there 5 days a week anyway.
For sure, and I think actually it comes to that question when you look at if you look at that survey, as we said, 4% would be the one, you know, saying, oh yes, we'll go back as it was before. If that's the case, then for me that indicates that there needs to be some convincing why it is you'd want people back in the office, and I think people have found balance. And I know a lot of us have talked about, you know, the kind of loneliness, etc., but at the same time there's also the overwhelmedness that we've talked about before, about you at home, your other half potentially, 2 kids trying to do online schooling and sharing the broadband between them. Some people would welcome the opportunity to get away from that. So I think this is what needs careful thinking. It's not just a case of how do we get them back, it's what is it that, you know, that's going to be the reason for that, and finding the purpose. While we're talking, just what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share our contact details now on the screen in case anyone wants to pick up with us afterwards. So hopefully
just to try and bring that bit to a close, I think it's not about a management dictate anymore. I think it is about a tailored solution, taking people's needs into account and a lot more humanity being shown around getting people back to work and learning from experience. I think we touched a lot on people looking after themselves today as well, and we thought we'd end by asking people on the call, what's your preferred way of looking after yourself in 2021, including alcohol? We thought we'd better mention that because I'm sure it will come up. So there is a poll there. If you get a chance just to click on it, we'd be interested. But I'm going to wind things to an end now, and thank you all very much for being with us today, particularly those, as I mentioned at the start, who are far, far away in terms of connecting with us. We look forward to working for you, with you, alongside you, whichever way is appropriate in the future. We think we have a massive fund of skills and experience around change, around organisation renewal and associated issues that we could offer But it's been interesting today really to focus on, I think, what have been some big agenda issues for many of the people on the call. The early poll talked about talent really being the #1 priority. This issue of remote working is definitely has to be on our agenda, and finding the right answers to managing that is, I think, an important challenge. And maybe the third of three would be, is our leadership really capable of managing in the current situation? How do we help our leaders become better people and develop their skills? So with that in mind, Joe has put up the contact details for us. We'd be more than delighted to have conversations with any of you again as a follow-up. We will be on social media putting blogs out and on LinkedIn regularly, so please do look out for that. And good luck to all of you. Please stay safe, look after yourselves, your families, and all your loved ones and those near you, and success with your business. And good luck in 2021. We hope they have the chance of supporting that success. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
See ya.